I am really excited today to welcome back one of my favorite people, not just in the design space, but in general, the wonderful Lisa Glanz.
So excited to be here. So I hope I can add some value and give you guys some tips for watercolor painting and Procreate in general. And also obviously just show my brushes and things like that. So yeah, this is going to be fun.
Lisa, what are you going to be teaching us today?
Okay, so I know a lot of people struggle with the watercolor thing in Procreate. To be honest, so did I initially. So that's why I wanted to create a pack that was easy to use and not so overwhelming. And I think I found a way. Okay, basically what I did was I experimented forever and I found a way that helps me to create a more realistic look, and basically I created this pack around that. So I'm going to show you exactly how to use it, and hopefully you guys can get some good results as well. Obviously what I'm showing you isn't the only way to achieve these things, but I'm hoping that I can at least show you how I do it, and then hopefully you guys can pick up some tips as well.
I know there's quite a lot of watercolor out there, but I know with Lisa, it's like, even though you're kind of jumping into something that already exists, you always put your personal spin on it, and you always think about how to make it as useful and usable and beneficial as possible. And this pack is just incredible. So even if you're an existing watercolor fan, you know, notepads at the ready, because you're going to learn a lot in today's session.
How does it look, Tom?
It looks beautiful, like a fine art gallery.
Okay, so what I thought of doing, guys, is just quickly talking you through some of the examples that I've already created. And the reason for this is I wanted to just show you the different ways you can apply these, the brushes and the textures to get particular results. And then hopefully you can walk away from this, being armed with a little bit more info. Okay, so the first thing that's very important with getting that realistic look in Procreate is your finished piece needs to look dry. I know that sounds obvious, but what I'm finding with some of the brushes out there is that they still look wet, if that makes sense. So I think
it really does, actually, and that's something I hadn't considered. But as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh yeah.
So, because if you think about it, once you finish painting, obviously the painting dries, and all those lovely, like, hard-edged imperfections and color variation is actually what gives it that more realistic look. So the best way to achieve that, and trust me, I've spent hours kind of figuring stuff out. The best way to actually achieve that is to use a combination of brushes and real watercolor splotches and shapes and things like that. So that's why this set has a collection of, it's just a few brushes, so you're not overwhelmed. And I personally believe you can pretty much achieve a lot of different various styles of watercolor with just these brushes. And then the rest of the set is all about the stamps and applying those to your actual shapes and your work to give it that look. So it's, as I said, very important to make it look dry. So you're going to use a combination of things to achieve that. So if I zoom in, I'm just going to actually turn off the layers just to show you how I got there. So obviously I started with a base color, and the whole idea about this is kind of layering and applying stamps as you go. It's all about clipping masks and blending modes. Generally, I use multiply, which you, of course, can, you can experiment. But that is basically how you're going to achieve that sort of dry look. And so as you're working with your base sort of shape and you're adding a clipping mask and, you're adding color variation and things like that with the stamps, you'll start seeing kind of hard edges. You'll see on that leaf. You'll see kind of dry, hard edges. And it's that, I believe, is what gives it that more authentic look. And it's
kind of deliberate imperfections.
Exactly. Because if you think about it, in watercolor, you actually don't really know how it's going to dry once, you only really see the final results once everything's dry. And that's kind of what we're trying to mimic here. So I'm just going to turn everything back on. And then you'll see, obviously, with the addition of, you know, the splatters and I use shadow and that kind of thing just to create a bit of depth. All those things all contribute to, you know, creating that specific look. And then another thing to consider is a limited palette. Especially if you're a little overwhelmed initially about palettes and you know, color, that kind of thing. So stick to, you know, one particular kind of tone of palette, because in watercolor, again, you don't want it too garish, if that makes sense. Obviously, there is a specific look for that, you know, kind of look as well out there. But generally speaking, you want to keep things, you know, kind of one tone that gives it that more sophisticated look as well. And then another thing I want to mention is when creating, just a general tip, that's what I find helpful, is start with a light base color. So I'm just going to turn all of these off to show you. Okay, maybe we'll keep on his.
Hi, so cute.
Okay, so you'll notice
makes me smile.
Oh, good. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so you'll notice I actually used a really light blue as the base for this guy, but he actually ends up being quite a dark bear. So the reason for that is that I wanted all those that light color to come through every time I use the stamp. So we're just basically adding stamps as we go, and each stamp is of, you know, darker in color. So we're building up that kind of lovely dry texture. If I just zoom in by his face, so that bloom that you see, you know, to the right of his face is from the stamp, and that gives it that kind of natural watercolor look. So that's also another great tip. So start with a light base color, which is very exactly what you would do with real watercolor, and then build it up from there. And then don't be scared of imperfections and adding sort of color variation. You know, I know a lot of people kind of feel overwhelmed by the imperfections. They think it looks wrong. But if you think about it, if you have a look on Pinterest and you study real watercolor, there's a lot of imperfections going on. And that's kind of like the beauty about it. So yeah, don't be scared. Make mistakes. Okay.
Yeah, it's more fun. You can be more free.
Exactly. And then just another last thing I wanted to mention about the stamps and using them. Also, don't be afraid to use them in kind of creative, unique ways. So for this one, for example, I used a band across her eyes, which is one of the stamps. And then I used a lot of stamps to create that contrast, that kind of dramatic bleeding bloom feel that you see in the painting. And I also used it to be the base of some of the areas. So if I could just find, that's that one. Yeah, so basically what I did there was I stamped out one of the stamps. In fact, let me just show you exactly. So if we start with a darker color, we'll start with that bloom. And then all I simply did was I just used one of my smudge tools, and I blended it in, with the background to make it look like it's part of the work. And that's a nice way to also use the stamps. You don't have to use it as clipping masks. You can use it as your beginning shape, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Lisa, I keep seeing these people on TikTok and Instagram Reels and that kind of thing, where they do ink drops on a bit of paper, and then however the drops land, they have to turn it into a character.
Oh,
so
wow.
It'll be an abstract shape, and it kind of this reminds me a bit of that, how you're using that abstract stamp and then you're building a composition around it.
Exactly. That's actually a good way to put it. Yeah. So it's a fun way to also stretch your imagination and kind of like make you think a little bit more sort of abstractly as well. And as I said, get creative with the stamps. Like I used them for her cheeks here as well. So yeah, there's so many possibilities. Hopefully that gives you some kind of idea and tips of how you can get started with getting that look.
Let's jump into the demo.
Yeah, definitely.
You're reigniting my love for good stamp brushes.
Yeah, so it's I mean, as we know with anything, it's about understanding you know, how to get the best use out of it. So I'm hoping that all these kind of tutorials I'm going to put together are going to show you exactly how to do that. Okay, so I'm going to start by just sketching out. We're going to be creating a butterfly, so I'm just going to start by sketching that out. I'm going to use the sketching detail brush. And I know everyone's going to say, why don't you use the, you know, the perspective, what do you call it, the flip guide thing, where you can just draw it once and it shows you.
Like the symmetry.
So, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. The reason why I'm not doing that, if you think about it, when we're drawing in real life, you don't have that. So we want this to look as realistic as possible and something that you created on paper. So try not to, you know, think of things that are not going to shortcut that. So that would be a shortcut. Okay, I'm just going to start with the center line just to get an eye going. And it's kind of like a loose curve. Do the same on the other side.
I love the conviction to your craft and an authentic result, by the way. It's nice to see. No cheats here.
No
people.
Cheats. I'm just getting a feel for where I want it to end, top and bottom. Also, you know, you don't want, like, any opportunity you can have to improve your drawing skills, you know, it's a good idea to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so obviously that's the center of our butterfly. And I'm just going to draw the top wing. Okay, so we're just roughly getting our shapes. We're not going for perfection, obviously. And this is just going to be my base kind of guide. And just another tip, which I'm sure a lot of you know already, but I use it all the time, is if you're really struggling with a shape to kind of get it, you know, exactly how you want it, I use the liquify tool so much just to tease it into like exactly how I want it, instead of fiddling for hours with your pencil.
I didn't know that, actually, but that is a good insight into your workflow.
Yeah, and I actually do the same if I've, you know, drawn something or painted something and it's just like off, you know, I'm just not getting it. Yeah, so that liquify tool is brilliant for that. Okay, so we're going to start our first sort of shape with, okay, I'm using the all-rounder. So maybe I should just quickly talk you through the brushes. They are essentially kind of 4 painting brushes, and then the rest are more blending brushes. But, you know, obviously you can paint with them as well. But that was kind of the idea behind them. And the reason why there's so few, and trust me, I spent hours making sure they do a lot of fancy stuff, is that I didn't want to overwhelm you with hundreds of brushes that you don't need. So these brushes are literally like the essential brushes that really do so much. And I'm going to show you how you can actually use them in so many different ways. And at least then every time you go to choose a brush, you don't have to like really double think like, what brush am I going to use for what? It's pretty straightforward, and the results are, I think, pretty good.
That's really smart, actually, because I know as much as we like options, it can be overwhelming. And often what happens is we tend to whittle down to our favorites anyway.
Exactly.
So you've essentially done that for us.
Yes. Okay, so as with all watercolor brushes in Procreate, you know, you want to kind of not really lift your pencil, but if you do, it's not the end of the world, because you can always, you know, use one of the smudge tools. And I find that I like leaving a little bit of gaps every now and then, because that's, yeah, I mean, from my painting on, you know, real paper, I always found that in my work, because I'm not the neatest painter. So with the nice thing about watercolor brushes for me that I found is that it's kind of forced me to slow down. Normally I'd be scribbling this in at a pace of 1,000 kilometers an hour. So this is like it's a lovely cathartic kind of thing to do. So bear that in mind, like you don't have to rush.
And that entire filling of that part of the wing, you didn't lift the Apple Pencil?
I didn't.
Right?
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you if I did. So let's lift it there and carry on. So you'll see that overlap. And that's not a problem because two things. One, you could leave it because that happens a lot in real watercolor. Or we can go and blend it, which is what I'm going to show you. Because in this particular instance, I don't want that overlap. Okay, so I'm using the wet blending brush. I haven't changed the color or anything, and I'm just going in and blending those overlaps. I'm leaving the white areas that you see, those gaps, because I quite like them. And just adjusting the size of my brush as I go if I need to.
That's really effective, actually, because those lines were pulling the eye.
You tend to go there.
Yeah, immediately with a bit of blending, gone.
Also, what happens is they will show up when we start using stamps, even more pronounced. So that's something to bear in mind. So I'm just jiggling my pencil near the bottom there, just to create.
Have you gone darker here, or is that just more pressure?
Oh, sorry, I changed the color dash.
Right, okay.
So it is slightly darker.
It looks so realistic, Lisa.
Yeah, so those kind of dark edges. Wow, did I take a long time to get there? To get the brush to do that. But yeah, when I finally got it to work the way exactly how I wanted it, I think the whole neighborhood heard me.
It looks so cool. I mean, that's one of my favorite things I love about watercolor is those wonderfully organic but sharp looking edges.
Yeah. And if you think about it, it's actually that's what's giving you that kind of dry look, once the piece is dry. Because naturally pigment pools on the edges of the painting. Okay, so I'm going to add a new layer. I just want to mention, if you're running out of layers, you've got a couple of options. You can either resize the canvas, bring it down in size by just coming over to your little sort of spanner icon and choosing canvas, crop and resize. And then if you hit settings, you can just enter a new value. Or the other alternative is once you're happy with whatever you're creating as a clipping mask above the image, you can flatten it each time. So if you're finding that you're actually running out of layers, but I don't need to do that, so I'm just going to keep everything. So don't think you have to do the same. But yeah, that's just a tip if you need more layers. Okay, so I'm going to turn that into a clipping mask. I'm going to set it to multiply. And then I'm going to choose kind of almost like a brighter blue, and coming down to one of my stamps. It's kind of like a big splotchy stamp. I'm just going to stamp once, and you can already see some lovely kind of imperfections happening with some dry edges. That's what we're going for. A new clipping mask. Again, multiply, and I'm just varying the color as I go because that's what creates interest in your work. And I'm just flipping it. Okay, so that is a little bit unrealistic, sort of top left. I'm going to smudge that. Oops. Okay, that looks better. So each time I'm just creating a clipping mask. And again, you can play with the blending modes, but so far I prefer the multiply. Seems to work really well for my purposes. And now we're going to go with a darker color. And that's another great tip, is to remember to create contrast in your watercolor work, because that's what creates kind of more interest and mood to the piece. So don't be scared to go really dark if you need to in some places. And I'm just basically bringing in some darker areas to the bottom. And I want to remove that sort of halo that's created at the top. So I'm just deleting that.
Can I ask you something, Lisa?
Yes.
Do you think watercolor is ever going out of style? Because it's been around for ages, but still I look at this and it just seems so commercially, you know, popular, and like I could see this on a card, I could see this on a pillowcase. Like it seems to work, and it seems to have this endless longevity, it seems.
Yeah, and it's definitely a top tip here for all those illustrators out there wanting to you know, license their work. It seems to still appeal hugely to art directors. They really do still like that handcrafted sort of painted look. So yeah, I don't think it'll ever go out of style, to be honest. Okay, so I'm just going to create another clipping mask. This time I'm going to choose kind of like a brownie color, just for color variation. And I'm going to use a sort of a blotchy, like a Bloom's stamp brush. And again, don't be afraid to, you know, rotate, resize, kind of, you know, experiment with blending modes, experiment with the stamps. And you'll see I'm literally just, you know, stamping and figuring out how it looks. Do I like it? Do I want to adjust it? And you'll see now we're starting to see that imperfection of the overlap on our base layer. So I'm going to go back to that base layer, and I'm just going to smudge it again. This time I'm going to use a smudge tool, the wet blender. And I'm just going to get rid of that. Okay, that looks a bit better. Okay, and now I'm going to use one of the other stamps. There's two little splotches and a different stamp. Yep, that looks pretty good.
I'm loving this, Lisa. It looks so realistic.
Well, that's good to know.
Even down to like the slightly shaky lines at the bottom of the wings. I wondered why you were doing that at first, but now it's all coming together. It looks so great.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly do like a kind of abstract body and bring the brush size down, do little antenna-y things. Okay, I know I'm being perfectionist, but I don't like those, so I'm just going to blend that. Okay, so I really like using kind of a bloom effect wherever I can, because for me that's kind of interesting. So what I'm going to do is, sometimes it takes a little bit of experimenting to get the results that you want, but what I have found is, so our base color is blue. So what we want to do is we want to start with quite a more intense version of the base color, which is probably going to be something like that. It could even be more intense. Oops. Coming down to our bloom stamp. Just going to stamp that out.
Wow.
So I'm trying to think if that is too intense, but I'm going to go with it for now. You can always change that. And then what you want to do is you just want to come darker and darker as you go. because that mimics that whole thing of how blooms work with watercolor. So it takes the most intense part of the pigment and then it kind of bleeds it out. And that's what we want to mimic. Again, just sticking with, I think I'm going to stick with that brush. Well, actually, no, let's go with this guy. Okay, so that needs to be more intense. If you want something to be more intense, you just want to duplicate that layer and basically intensifies the color each time. I just want to merge that down. And I'm going to come over to the original sort of body layer. And using my bloom accent stamp, I'm going to bring the opacity down and just kind of tease the color in and see what happens. Yeah, that looks better. I think that's starting to look more realistic. Okay, so as a final touch, well, actually, there are a few things we can do. I want to just show you how you can use the bloom stamp in reverse. In other words, white. So creating another clipping mask, I'm going to use a lighter color. And I'm going to use the build up bloom stamp. And just in the area above, sorry, let's bring this lower. So just in the area underneath the brown area, I just want to create a little bit of a white kind of bloom, just to accentuate, you know, the differentiation in color. And it'll probably mimic, you know, the more realistic how things would happen in real life, because you would apply that brown and then it would probably be water first. So that's what we want to mimic. And the same for underneath the splotches.
Lisa, I'm sure this is a well-known quote, but would you agree that so much of being an artist is learning how to see, especially when it comes to organic mediums like watercolor? Clearly, not just in creating these brushes, but in all your work, I can tell there's been hundreds of hours of staring at watercolor.
Yeah,
you know, on paper and real life.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's how you learn, right? Yeah, because I mean, that's exactly how you learn. You got to study from other people who have already achieved the results that you want.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I really love adding even darker edges where I can, where that makes sense to how it would be in real watercolor. So I've created a new layer. I'm just going to move it right to the top. I'm going to set that to multiply, and choosing a darker color, I'm just going to come in with my bloom accent brush. So this brush is super versatile for, you know, adding color variation and blooms where you want, you know, the color to be kind of almost unpredictable, very similar to the center of the butterfly. So what you can do is you can start large if you like and just tease, like come in kind of wide and just tease the color in as you come in, just to test how the brush is placing that color and if it's the right pigment color. Because you don't want to, you know, you don't want to go over the top. You still want it to look natural. So I'm just gently applying that darker color here and there with quite a large size. And I just want to change that to a browny color so it matches the brown that we have. And you can really, I mean, you can go crazy and go really dark if you like. But that's not what I'm going for today. But just to show you how much pigment you can add for that variation.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I really like to do is make it quite small and then just tease that color on the edges here and there.
That's a good tip, actually, for kind of faking those sharp edges.
Okay, so I really like adding pencil detail onto my watercolor. I know not every artist is you know, likes doing that, but I do. So I'm just going to show you what I do and how I add just a little bit of more quirky details here and there. and adding a completely new layer. Let's choose that guy, see what happens. Okay, so using that sketching detail brush, I want to set that to multiply, so it just blends in nicely with the background. And we're just going to draw some veins. Also, what's really something that you can consider doing, especially if your sketches are neat, you could think about possibly leaving your sketch layer on. So when you're sketching things out, use a gray color so it looks like pencil, and then consider actually leaving it on. Obviously here, it's a bit iffy because I used sort of straight lines and things like that, because that kind of thing you would see in real watercolor. You would actually sometimes pick up, the artist sort of sketching lines, and that also adds to the whole authentic look.
It really goes a long way, actually, these subtle touches.
Yeah.
We had some incredible Photoshop sessions recently, Lisa, with some of the biggest Photoshop teachers in the world, and they would do stuff like they would actually add grain back into their final imagery for a poster design, because in the printing process and so on,
that's what you see.
That would be grain. It wouldn't just be perfectly smooth. So
absolutely,
it's weird, isn't it? You get this polished digital outcome, and then you almost try and undo it and
yeah,
add back in those granular details.
Yes, that's weird. Okay, so yeah, you can add obviously as much detail as you want, and I actually enjoy adding like really quirky things, like little. Oops, that's a multiply, so new layer.
How much nicer is it that you chose not to go using the symmetry tool?
Yeah, exactly.
If it was perfectly symmetrical, it would undermine all of these subtle details.
Yeah, and
all I would see would be a fake.
Our brains are pretty smart, so we pick up subtleties, better than we think, and I think we would probably notice that it was more manufactured that way. Okay, so for the last finishing touch, I like adding splatters and things like that. So I'm going to use one of the splatter brushes and come down to that. Choose again like kind of browny color and see what happens. Set that to multiply. Maybe the other one for some variation. Maybe we should go blue. Too small. Yeah, that's it. Not too complicated, is it?
Beautiful, and yeah, definitely very nice and easy to follow along, I think. But yeah, Lisa,
Yay!
thank you.
Pleasure.
So therapeutic watching you work. It actually reminded me with the butterfly, where psychologists are like, say what you see.
Oh, what is that?
Symmetrical shape.
Yes.
It was one of those. Personally, I saw a butterfly, but I'm not very clever, so I probably missed something. So I'll tell you what. Just going to say, actually, go on the page, or a bit of both. Why not?
Okay. So maybe what I'll do
I think we've got
is
some time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start with the product page because that kind of shows everything. Okay. So let me share my screen again. Can you see that?
Yes, I can. God, you've got really bright colors on your monitor.
Oh, really?
Yeah, cool. they look like totally different colorway than what I'm seeing.
Oh. Okay,
cool.
so
would you mind hitting Command plus a couple of times, which will zoom us in on the images? There we go. Incredible.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's the AquaReal pack, Lisa's brand new pack. Lisa, please do show off the fruits of your labor.
Well, okay, so that as I've mentioned to you guys, I wanted to create a versatile pack that wasn't overwhelming. It was also important for me to show you all the different styles you could create with the pack. So it's I don't want to just keep kind of give you that impression that it's just for specific look. So hence all the different types of illustrations I've included, like this little guy. Or maybe what I can do as well, if there's time, I'll show you how to quickly create this kind of variation that I've created in this branch, because it's super easy. If you kind of use the stamps as your base color variation and then kind of just paint over that, it's actually quite fun to see how it changes. So that's a quick and easy way to create color variation in your work without too much effort, because that's the whole point, right, Tom? You wanted to like create stuff that isn't complicated for people. You want them to be able to achieve. It's pointless me showing stuff that is like unachievable. You want people to be able to achieve the same things you have, essentially.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
So as I mentioned, there's 8 painting and blending brushes, and they're super versatile. They will cover a massive range of applications, and I think it was important for me to do that so that people didn't feel overwhelmed. And because that was the number one thing that I heard was, I don't know what brush to use for X. Every time I go in to choose a watercolor brush, there's just so many, and I get overwhelmed. So that was super important for me to keep it simple. So these are simple and versatile. And
beautiful. They look so natural, and honestly, again, it should be coming out in a week or two, the podcast we recorded last night. But Lisa really went in depth about her product process, and it was so interesting to hear how many hours and how much work you put into actually listening to what people want and listening to their pain points and coming up with something as beautiful as this, but also as practical and functional and well thought out for their actual day-to-day needs.
Yeah, exactly. Because I wanted to kind of meet, which is a tricky thing sometimes, but I wanted to meet both the beginner and the advanced person with this pack. I wanted both of those kind of people to enjoy using it. So and then we spoke about, and I showed you some of the stamps and what you can do with them. The important thing is to, again, as I showed you, is to kind of layer them and think about all the different ways you can add variation to your work. So in the leaf example, I used a combination of different colors on top of that leaf. You'll see on the right-hand side leaf, just to the right of it, there's kind of like a yellowy splotch. So that was the bloom splotch or blotch that I used for that. So that's a nice way to introduce color without commitment, if that makes sense. You can always just change it and delete it, turn it off, whatever. So it's a good way to experiment and see how you can transform your watercolors. Stunning.
So much depth.
Yeah, so this pack includes 3 different pre-made canvases, and that's another thing I should have actually shown you, which I can show you now. So with these sets, obviously the canvas does a lot of enhancement of the work, but I did make sure to allow you to be able to turn off the paper texture so that I'll just go down to that image, show you that. So if we turned off that, on the left-hand side, you'll see the paper texture is applied. And then on the right-hand side, we've taken the paper texture off, but we still left the other effects on. So that's super handy I was very aware of like artists who need to, do post-production and maybe make a PNG with transparent background. So that's going to be much easier for you to actually get that transparent background, done in Photoshop. And really then the other alternative is you could actually clip all those textures to your painting. That's also not a problem, but this is a quick and easy way to achieve that, that white background. And so I just wanted to show we spoke about that, using the stamps in a creative way, thinking about a combination of hard edges and blending the color. That's what's going to give you that authentic look. So the stamps will basically help you achieve that much, much easier. And then the color palettes included.
I love that you included these.
Yeah, so it's like a variation of a more traditional kind of watercolor, palettes, and then the more fun sort of, versatile palettes. It's not only, I use these also with my other brushes, so it's also good for non-watercolor work. And then, this is just a demo to show you, you can create some lovely floral illustrations or, quirky illustrations.
There's a mouse in his beard. Look at that.
Yeah,
so that's amazing.
That's actually a good example. I'm not sure if you can see where my mouse is pointing at the moment, like that circled area. So all those variations that you see in his jacket, that's been created by literally one stamp. So I basically painted out the jacket in a lighter color, that sort of greeny color, and then I stamped on top of that a clipping mask, and you have instant sort of variation where you didn't spend hours to achieve that. So it's a good way to get that quickly. And yeah, we've spoken about that guy. And so then there's
I love the name AquaReal as well. It's really inspired.
Yeah, so it's a play on, well, I don't know if you got it, but it's a play on AquaReal. I don't know if you got that, but I don't know how it came to me.
Well, and just talking about the authenticity of how real they are.
Exactly. I think that's it.
Incredible. Lisa, I'm blown away. What an incredible pack. Thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate your time as always.
That was cool.
Yeah, super fun.
Tom.
Bye, Lisa.